on this lunchtime seminar. I've kind of participated in these when I was a student, so it's great to kind of see it on the other side as well. So I'll get straight to it. So the talk today is about overcoming super wicked challenges by unlocking collective intelligence. So before I kick off, I just want to do a quick introduction about ourselves. So Manolya and I are both graduates of the Masters in Environmental Technology from CEP. We met there and we've had between us around 10 years of experience consulting for research and development. So it's paved the way for a lot of conversations about R&D, kind of the limitations of R&D and ways we could move ahead, which is why we decided to found Sensapien, which most of this research is kind of based on. So I'll delve straight in and say why we decided to go with the word super wicked problems. And it's just to really differentiate from, kind of your average run-of-the-mills challenges and problems, right? So these are, this is a coin termed by a few researchers back in 2012, really to kind of differentiate a very specific type of problem where time is running out, where we have a kind of a deadline where we're racing against the clock, where there's no clear central authority over who is supposed to solve it. So it's not kind of a, oh, well, speak to the CEO of this company and get it fixed. It's more, no one's really in charge. Then there's also that the people who we entrust or the institutions that we trust to solve these problems are also the ones responsible for causing it or have an interest really in not solving it. And finally, it's the policies as well as the policy makers of these of the solution really kind of discount the future with their policies and with the solutions they're trying to propose. And really, climate change fits perfectly into this kind of category. And here we see the Secretary General really having to stand in a puddle of sea level rise to say that we're losing the race against climate change. And really, I think we have to come to terms that we're all on CP, so this is kind of redundant to repeat, but still that even if we were to stop emissions today completely and solve the problem of mitigation, we have to develop solutions to adapt the damage or rectify the damage we've already sent into the planet. And we kind of go back and say, well, really, the key to solving these is accelerating innovation, developing new clean technologies, and we're really not there yet. The potential for us reaching clean technology or our ability to innovate in this area has not yet been reached. And just to kind of show, this is a great tool, if some of you might be aware of it, it's co-developed by Imperial, which kind of shows that if we were to improve not just the viability of clean technology, but also the efficiency of our current technology without affecting behavior change or kind of other human elements, that we would be able to significantly reduce our environmental and carbon footprints. Kind of reiterating that point, really, the European Union developed a study that said, like, actually at the design stage of any technology or product, the people who are behind the design have control to decide up to 80% of the environmental footprint of the products that they have that they're putting out into the market. And here it's just kind of goes back to the point that it's all a matter of time. And I remember this is kind of a shift in perspective, at least I gained when I was doing my master's thesis at Imperial, where I spoke to the head of CNRS, a French research lab, who said, look, all technology is pretty much possible. It's just whether or not it'll be done in time to solve the problem it's supposed to solve. And here's really the point. It's about time. It's about accelerating and getting these technologies to market in time. So will we get these, radical innovations to market? And, if you look at the past, we see a wide range. I mean, this is kind of research done by the UK Energy and Research Council. And really, it's a wide range, right? So you have lithium-ion batteries taking around 18 years and the car taking up to 7. So obviously, we're getting better at producing and commercializing technology and putting it up in the mainstream. But it's on average, if we look back over the 200 years, it takes around 44 to 66 years to get something from kind of an idea to mass commercialization. So the point here is, unless we radically accelerate our ability to innovate, it's really unlikely that we are going to be able to develop the technology we need to significantly reduce our carbon emissions and meet the Paris Agreement targets. And this is kind of the core where we want to discuss about how do we improve and accelerate the mode of innovation not necessarily an individual technology. And to do that, we're taking a theoretical framework from Nancy Roberts, who back in 2000 kind of developed a model to understand how societies deal with these complex super wicked challenges. And I'm going to start with discussing the authoritative model. So the authoritative model is essentially our default mode, right? So it's going to the right institutions and organizations where we've identified a core group of experts or stakeholders and say, right, you're responsible for solving this problem. But that has a lot of issues surrounding it. Ultimately, it's just most of these decisions could be made in a small boardroom with just a handful of people who might represent a very small array of the wider human demographic. And the way that it's done is we reduce and simplify a lot of these issues and eliminate a lot of perspectives that might need to be considered when making these decisions. And when we go back to innovation, really 80% of, let's say, patents, or 70% or around patents in the EU at least, come out of big corporations, right? So these are institutions that kind of lead the charge for accelerating our innovation, developing our technology. And these types of kind of authoritative models are designed over a hierarchy. So the groups of people who are involved in developing this innovation and technology are organized into units, siloized divisions, and this is the real model we work for most of our human innovation. Then there's a few problems with that, and that really hierarchies or bureaucracies per se are designed for enhancing productivity, not necessarily for enabling creativity and innovation. And research by Cornell and corroborated by others shows that for most big companies, innovation is difficult, and really most of why they survive and continue to move forward is that they optimize existing business processes as compared to really game-changing radical innovation. Here, they did a survey. Adobe did a survey for employees in big companies across kind of major economies, and a lot of them reported that they don't live up to their creative potential. And yes, actually, a few people here on this call might remember showing this slide, and they'll say, well, people think highly of themselves, and it's true. But ultimately, if 3/4 of the people who are supposed to be in charge of pushing the boundaries of innovation and solution forward do not feel that they're giving as much as they could, then we have a fundamental problem here that needs to be considered to unlock the potential of these individuals. And finally, really, if you take a big picture and look at it from a kind of overarching lens, we see that with less than 8 million kind of fully employed researchers around the world, only a very small percentage of the global population is involved in research and development and innovation. So we're relying on a really small fraction of the intellectual capability around the world to lead our innovation and find the solutions to solve a very complex challenge. And to add another layer of analysis to this, most of these researchers tend to be concentrated in few geographies. So we're talking here about the US, Western Europe, and East Asia, not necessarily representative of the wider demographics. Now, yes, a lot of these areas are very cosmopolitan and tend to draw in people from around the world, but still, it's not the same as having built up innovation infrastructures worldwide that allow people to innovate when they're living in the same geography of the problem they're trying to solve. Another aspect is that people say, well, maybe only 8 million people actually have the skills to lead the resources for innovation. But what we find is, really the academic community, depending how you look at them, could be numbered over 100 million people. And if you look at the key skill set, we train 300,000 PhD students every year who graduate from universities around the world, and less than 13% of them end up finding academic posts. Now, from the rest, a lot of them do end up leading research in industry, but for the most part, a lot of them end up taking professional executive roles, and really they have the skill set to be helping us lead this solutions to global challenges, but we're not taking advantage of their knowledge. So what is the result? The result is we're seeing signs of innovation stalling. It's a big debate, so the jury's still out on that, but there's significant indicators that show us that even though we're still innovating, we're just not innovating as efficiently and as quickly as we used to before. And I love this article, this cover of The Economist, which says really that will we invent anything this useful again? Most of the innovation now seems to be not as life-changing as it once was for most of the people around the world. And this is happening, despite a huge increase in spending for research. This is not to say that, despite the different crises, money has went down. No, we're pumping in a lot of money to the tune of over $2 trillion last year. And what we found here, and this is research recently out from MIT and Stanford, was that the efficiency of research is declining by half every 13 years. And what we mean here is that if you have, let's say, a group of 10 researchers to get the same output in terms of money or the same amount of time needed to get to the next invention, we need to double the number of researchers in your team with every 13 years to get the same output. And this kind of goes back to say that, there's a problem with this model. And in this, we have to say why. Well, why is this model no longer working for us? And Deloitte has a very interesting answer, and that is that the problems are becoming too difficult to solve, too complex for the traditional methods to tackle them. And a very great quote by Russell Ackoff, who's really the father of systems thinking, is that as our systems become increasingly complex, we've already picked the low-hanging fruit of science and technology, and to go kind of to the next level requires a lot more effort and reorganization. So one way to look at it is, we are used to setting up corner shops and little supermarkets when really we're at a stage now where we need to think, well, the next stage is setting up a Walmart. It's a completely different scale requiring different resources. And kind of looking at it, look at the results. So it's all good to kind of analyze how big organizations are there to solve problems. But once we look at the impact and we say, well, if 80+% of our innovation comes from these big organizations, well, 6 out of the top 10 brands have failed to really deliver low carbon innovations in the last 5 years. So there's clearly a problem, and we can no longer rely on these institutions to kind of solve the problem for us.
So moving on to the second mode of innovation that Nancy Roberts talks about, it's the competitive model, right? So the way that she describes it is it's pitting opposing points of views against each other. So you have a few different options, and then out of a selection of, say, 10, 20 problems, the best or solutions, the best one will be chosen. So looking at our response to the coronavirus, you'll see that most universities in the world have rushed to come up with a low-cost ventilator, including Imperial College, who's done an excellent job. But all of these universities have raced to come up with a great ventilator, but they've done so either as a standalone institution or in small groups of 2 or 3 different universities. Now, there is an exception to this. There's a project called the Open Source Ventilator Project based out of Dublin, where they've got about 6,000 engineers, I believe, on board that are working towards this. But for the most part, they don't have institutional affiliation. So the underlying current here is that all of these institutions have competed towards that recognition of being the university that came up with a solution. And this kind of brings me back to part of the reason why I started looking into this field. I was actually interning as a research associate for a cancer research lab based out of Imperial. And I remember there being 3 other universities in the world that were working on the exact same molecule. And this was a proposed cure for breast cancer, but we weren't sharing information, we weren't sharing data, and we were competing against each other instead of trying to drive each other forward. A quick look at hackathons. There's over 3,000 hackathons a year, over 200,000 participants, 13,000 prototypes have been created from 100 different countries. And this is from hackathon.com, and the figures are from 2016, I believe. But again, a great vibrant atmosphere where you've got thousands of people working, but they're working in small groups of maybe 7 to 10 different participants competing towards getting a prize. Now, the digital version of this is crowdsourcing, where you're essentially trying to get inputs or information from countless people, but you're doing it online. And there's really been this blossoming of competitive crowdsourcing platforms around the world. MIT's got the Climate Collab to try and look at these global challenge type problems, same as OpenIDEO. Innocentive is an Eli Lilly spin out, which is a really big pharmaceutical company. But they're doing fantastically well. They've got over 3 million users in the world. As of 2015, they were worth over $6 billion US. But again, they're working competitively. And 75% of global brands have already been using crowdsourcing, and a lot of different institutions are starting to see the value in this. So there's really this growing trend and recognition that crowdsourcing is actually a really useful resource for us. But there are issues with it. And it's that this competitive environment creates a bit of a confrontation where people aren't as willing to share knowledge. They're not willing to share data because at the end of the day, they're trying to be the ones that win. Now, with the crowdsourcing platforms that I've described, there's a lot more challenges with it. And one of them is that some of them are fundamentally unfair. There's this great example of a Goldcorp challenge that was posted in 2006 where they gave this world of geological data, and they pegged a reward of $300,000 for people to look through the data and try and identify where a gold mine might be. And indeed, they went on and found the gold mine. It was worth $6 billion to Goldcorp. So there's a massive discrepancy between the reward that's pegged and the value of that knowledge to the companies that are posting the problems. And again, because people are competing against each other, there's not that incentive for the best solution to be recognized. It's people want their own solutions to be recognized. But this brings on to a greater problem, right? So looking at these global challenges, would we prefer to be in a world where you've got 1,000 individual proposals for a global challenge, or would we rather harness the collective aggregate intelligence of 1,000 people working towards these goals together? This brings us on to Nancy Roberts' last mode of innovation, which is collaboration or collaborative. And the way that she describes it is the strategy aims to engage all stakeholders to find the best possible solution for all stakeholders involved. Now, the issue with collaboration is that it generally involves a lot of meetings, some of which can be really drawn out. But the aim is to have a common agreed solution or a common agreed approach to be formulated at the end of all of these discussions. A great example, which might resonate pretty tremendously right now, was the 2003 response to the SARS epidemic, where 84 scientists from around the world were able to collaborate to identify that the coronavirus was responsible for the epidemic. And the researchers involved stated that yes, they were able to do it in less than a month, but had they not been collaborating to the extent that they had been, they would have expected it to take at least 6 months, if not over a year. This is a brilliant case study to show what we're capable of doing when we're working together. And another great example of this was the Polymath project that came out of Cambridge, I believe, where again, someone had an excellent idea of just posting a conjecture that hadn't been solved for decades, and they were able to solve the conjecture as a collective working together. But there's brilliant examples of these collaborative crowdsourcing platforms growing around the world. Everyone, I'm sure, uses Wikipedia really frequently. I'm sure that I definitely do. GitHub is a fantastic example of people collaborating to create new things. It's an excellent tool for software developers and coders to try and develop tech together. But there's loads of examples of this trend towards collaborative crowdsourcing. But it's not just these open source platforms that are starting to cotton onto this trick of collaboration or collaborative crowdsourcing. Even Elon Musk famously put up this letter, which has slightly obscure grammar attached to it, which I'm still struggling to understand, but I'm sure it's there for a reason. But he states in this letter that he believes that Tesla and other companies making electric cars in the world would all benefit from a common, rapidly evolving technology platform. And for that reason, Tesla is no longer patenting their technologies. They're making it available so that other people can build upon the knowledge that they themselves have already developed. But there's obstacles to collaboration. There's a reason why it's not as widespread as we would like it to be. And the biggest reason for this is that communication breaks down in large groups. It's great when you're working in groups that are less than 12, but a lot of research has shown that once you surpass that number, communication starts breaking down. You get a lot of noise. People aren't able to convey what they want to say effectively enough. So that communication barrier really stops large groups of people from working together. Another risk is groupthink. Now, I'm sure we've all been in settings where you're in a meeting or we're in a brainstorming session of some sort, and we want to say something, but we're not sure how everyone else is going to react to it. So we might hold back. And often the case is that the most paradigm shifting ideas are the most likely to be ridiculed in group settings. So there is this danger of teetering towards groupthink when you're talking about collaboration, particularly if people's seniors are there, or if someone's being particularly loud and dominant in that group setting. There's always a risk of this kind of herd mentality developing. But the biggest feedback that we've had for a platform of this nature is that people are really apprehensive about sharing their intellectual property and risking that they're not recognized for their work, particularly if someone's done a PhD on something or it's their life's work and they've spent 20 years developing this one technology. They're really reluctant to collaborate because ultimately they want to be recognized for the work that they've done. So there's a big intellectual property barrier that's stopping us from collaborating at a much wider scale. Another thing, when we're looking at more academic settings, there's actually institutional barriers to interdisciplinary R&D. Now, interdisciplinary R&D is particularly important because it makes sure that we have those different fields of expertise sitting at a table together, that we've got different stakeholders represented by the people there. But it's quite difficult to get interdisciplinary work funded. It's also difficult to get published when you're working across different departments. And of course, in academia, it's publish or perish. So if someone feels like they'll be less likely to get published if they're working in an interdisciplinary setting, they're probably less likely to be involved in that type of collaboration. Of course, there's exceptions to this. There's a lot of open calls, especially from Innovate UK, where they're asking people to innovate or collaborate. But this is something that we're just starting to edge towards, and those institutional barriers still very much exist. So how do we augment innovation? How do we innovate and disrupt the way that we're innovating to make sure that we can get those critical technologies to the market faster? Well, we're not living in the 50s anymore. We've got a lot of digital tools that we have access to that completely have possibilities of changing the way that we're working together, particularly when we talk about collective intelligence. Now, this isn't necessarily a digital solution, but the most important part of solving any challenge is fully understanding the problem. Einstein famously said, if I have an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and only 5 minutes thinking about the solutions. And this very much reflects the thinking that a lot of other thought leaders in this industry have, that there's a lot of technologies that exist that aren't solving problems, which is why generally in a kind of incubator setting, the first thing that they will ask is, what problem are you solving? Because oftentimes it's that description of a problem that's quite ambiguous and hasn't achieved consensus from people. Another thing that we can really focus on is triggering creativity. So in these collective settings, something that's been found time and time again is that the collective is only as strong as its weakest link. So we really need to invest time and effort in making sure that there's an environment which augments the intellectual capacity of all of its participants on an individual as well as a collective basis. So there's different artificial intelligence capabilities that would allow us to trigger that creativity. There's a bunch of different technologies that have completely occurred by accident. The pictures here demonstrate the examples. There's the Teflon pan, insulin, X-rays, radioactivity, all found by accident. But sometimes it's about being around that lunch table with different people from different fields that say something that you wouldn't have thought of, because when we're in our research, we tend to think inside the box, and we need our creativity triggered by different tools. And this is something that can very easily be done by artificial intelligence. Now, this is an interesting one. The Mundaname is an excellent concept that was developed by Henry Lafontaine and Paul Aulet in 1910, I believe, and they saw it as the palace of the world. It contained 12 million different trinkets of information. So if we imagine it as, instead of having a library of books, it's a library of facts. And this kind of realm where all of these trinkets of information are readily accessible, easily searchable, and can be searched through in this 3D web, it could tremendously affect the way that we research and the way that we innovate. If we think about the difference that Google made to our workflow, and how having a search engine that will help us come up with linear solutions for our search queries, there must be an evolution to that. So it's quite possible to develop a different way of indexing facts so that we can view them as we may think in this virtual reality type of realm. I mean, this is a bit out there, I realize, but there must be an evolution to searching through different pieces of information. I'm sure that that's key to changing the way that we innovate. Another thing is, quickly mentioned, the Memex that was invented by Vannevar Bush. Vannevar Bush was one of the pioneers of the internet, and he created this, I believe in the late 1800s, an idea of having a supplement to one's memory, which is essentially what the internet was originally intended to do, but it's not quite the way that we use it now. And part of the reason for this is that the internet has too much information, and not all of that information is true or factual. There's a lot of misinformation and disinformation in there, and a lot of this can be cleaned up by machine learning to make sure that there's an environment where all of the information that you have at hand is validated, if not peer reviewed, at least machine reviewed. And this is something that we're already capable of achieving. So when it comes to the communication elements of things, so right, if we're sitting in a group of 1,000 people, you want to overcome that communication barrier. So we spent some time thinking about this. And if we look at the way that insect colonies interact, so bees, ants, termites, they communicate in thousands or hundreds and thousands, but they do so through indirect communication. It's a process called stigmergy, where if you think about it in the way that you drive, you're communicating with other drivers, but you're not necessarily speaking to them. You're doing it through standardized, recognizable actions within the environment, be it stopping at a traffic light or putting on that right indicator. There's different ways of communicating which don't necessarily involve language in the way that we know it now. And a further testament to this is that actually people found that they found group work, they found their collaborators to be more friendly and easy to work with in a setting where they were working silently, which was an interesting piece of research. I can't quite remember the institution that came up with it. But there's definitely a lot of research to be done with stigmergy and how we can use indirect communication to enable large-scale collaboration. So a really, really quick little tool, Git, which is what GitHub is powered on. It's the simple concept of version control. So if we're working with thousands of people, we need to be able to monitor the changes that are made within that environment so that someone, be it maliciously or just because they have a differing idea, don't necessarily go and change all the work that's been done without us being able to monitor that. Lastly, when it comes to the intellectual property angles of things, there's certainly ways that we can address this using blockchain. Now, if we think about all the contributions that can be made on this collaborative environment to be kept on an open source ledger, for it to all be transparent and bound by smart contracts, so it would be all be secure and non-disputable. But the thing with blockchain is because it's on this ledger system, it can't be hacked, it's safe. It could also empower a commercialization governance, either using cryptocurrencies or some other form of technology. But ultimately, it can power an algorithm that would track different contributions to make sure that people are recognized for their contributions to the technologies being developed in a space like this. In addition to that, the toughest part of any project is making decisions. So you could have different decision-making frameworks in place. And again, this can be action-based to make sure that it's not like first past the post where everyone's ticking a different box, but that they're actually engaging with their environment, and those engagements themselves are counted as contributions towards voting. These, again, can power different algorithms that would enhance a system of self-governance. Lastly, is the anonymization element of this. This is to a large extent to kind of combat the groupthink element. It's to make sure that, right, if Professor X at Imperial is contributing an idea, I'm not voting for their idea or engaging with their idea because they are Professor X, but we want to make sure that people are giving ideas themselves the merit based on the value of the idea and not based on who has contributed it. So enabling anonymization in that aspect ensures that. This also deals with a whole world of other issues like gender or racial biases, and it makes sure that people are actually recognized for the work they're doing and not for who they are or their backgrounds. And here's Doug Engelbart. Again, this guy's fantastic. He's better known for developing the mouse, but actually his work on augmenting human intelligence, which was done all the way in 1962, is tremendous. And he states that the key thing about all the world's biggest problems is that they have to be dealt with collectively. And if we don't get collectively smarter, then we really are doomed. He's amazing. You guys should definitely look into his work. That the Augmenting Human Intellect paper is a big inspiration to the work that we've done. But really the idea here is that it's the evolution of research and development. You have the Nikola Teslas of the world that are working in their faraway islands by themselves, developing technology alone. And the evolution of that was Menlo Park Research Lab that Edison set up, which was probably actually his biggest discovery, to get small groups of researchers working together on technologies. But we think that the evolution to that is global digital collaboration. And we definitely have the tools in place now to be able to achieve this on a much wider scale. And that's it from us. Thank you. And I don't know if there's any questions running on in the background, so let's take a look.
Shall we move back to our video?